One. So, Kirk, you've got a pretty cool opportunity coming up here, and I know you wanted to give a shout out before we get started here. So, could you go into a little bit of detail for that?
Absolutely. Long story short, I was flying business jets. The business went out of business, closed their doors. They sold the jets. I'm in a I'm close to meeting the requirements to go to a major airline. So very few people will hire me knowing that. So it'll I'll find a job. It'll take a while, but I had to kind of take what's available for me. And an amazing opportunity came up for me for whatever reason. Uh, they want me to go to the Middle East to help a allied country who bought an advanced attack helicopter that I'm familiar with, and help them with training and tactics and things of that nature. So I'm very, very fortunate to have that opportunity. So I want to thank Mike Rohrbeck for vouching for me, and I want to thank Rob Baird for hiring me. So those two guys I want to say thanks to, and obviously my wife for allowing me to go back to the Middle East and be involved. As far as I know, there's no war going on, but it is it's a war machine. It's a dangerous aircraft, and she's letting me get back in that realm. And so thank you to my wife, Brooke.
Well, also shout out to your wife, Brooke, for letting you come on today, of course. And I know being supportive of you with your book, with your career, and still there by your side. I mean, that's a story in itself for everything that she's been through. And I know that with this experience you're going to have, hopefully that's going to lead to some more additional stories, to say the least, whenever you get back. However,
Yeah.
I know we were texting that in the first interview, there was a guy that commented that remembered the train wreck there in Louisiana. And
Mhm.
I know you had an excellent Facebook post about that, of course, on your page, but I wanted you to go into a little bit of detail about that comment and, of course, the photograph that, of course, was never published.
Absolutely. Um, and it was in the Baldwin County area of Alabama, southern, but it was on the Gulf Coast. Essentially, I was a Force Recon Marine. I had just completed scuba school, and there were operations going on in Somalia. So everyone was This is before the Battle of Mogadishu, which actually happened a week later. So everyone's tracking Mogadishu. That's what we're all kind of preparing for. We're like, hey, at any minute, man, we're going to get the call to go over there. So just kind of stand by. But I was fortunate to complete dive school before we got the green light. So I get a phone call one morning about 5 o'clock, and it's the duty NCO, and he's like, "Hey, man, pack your shit, man. We're being mobilized." And I'm like, Somalia, we're going to Mogadishu. And he's like, "Nah, man, there was a terrorist attack that took out a bridge, and a train went into the water, and the FBI has been called in because it's a terrorist attack, and we're combat divers. You just got out of dive school. We're going to go dive on the wreck and see if we can recover evidence or whatever the FBI directs us to do." Our commander had a good working relationship with the FBI SWAT commander. And if you're not in, and it may have changed, but this is back in '93. You had FBI regional SWAT teams, so they would cover several states, and they were out of New Orleans, I believe, but they covered the area where we were. And then you had the FBI HRT, which was from Quantico. Similar missions, but the HRT essentially does hostage rescue only, and the FBI SWAT team is a very highly trained team of agents who have their normal duties and then are recalled in certain events. So anyway, I grabbed my stuff and headed over to the unit, and they're like, "Hey, man, start grabbing dive gear and prep the boats and everything." We put Zodiac boats on the back of the trailers and whatnot, and we were kind of briefed en route. And then the word came out like, "Hey, man, there's miscommunication, but we're going to go ahead and go there anyway because the FBI wants us there." What had actually happened, um, a captain with a bunch of barges got lost in low visibility. He went up a tributary, and one of his barges hit a bridge and knocked the support, hit the support section, and it moved the track 4 inches, which doesn't sound like a lot, and it didn't set off any alarms. Like it had it been 5 inches or 6 inches, the metal contact would have broken, and there would have been an alarm for the train. It hit it just enough to move it, to make it unsafe, but not set off the alarm. So either he didn't know he did that, or I'm not, I wasn't in the ship with him or whatever. But he reversed out and just went back upriver, possibly not even knowing that it happened. Well, the barge that hit it came loose and stayed there. And obviously the train comes in at like 80 miles an hour. The tracks are off. It hits the misaligned tracks, and it all goes into the water. And a lot of people were killed. But during the impact, the engines caught on fire. The train engines caught on fire. So the Coast Guard went out looking for it early in the morning, and they saw a fire, and they saw the bridge out, and that's what they reported. Well, as it's being reported up the chain, someone misinterpreted that as there was a terrorist incident. They blew up a bridge. There's a train in the water. So that's how the FBI got involved. So anyway, we get down there, and do you just want the story about the picture, or do you want kind of an overall?
With the overall, I know you mentioned that on scene, you guys were given the grisly task of body recovery, and a lot of horrible traumatic sights that you guys are exposed to, especially for guys who had never seen anything of that nature. Because it's not just adults, there's kids, there's teenagers, the elderly as well, and it's a grisly task that it was just an accident, but somebody's got to do it.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And just to give credit where credit's due, there was a civilian hard hat dive team that was there before we got there. So, and they never got credit. We all got medals, but man, those guys never got the credit they deserved. They were the first ones there, and they were setting up cables underneath the train cars, because they knew they would have to remove it from the river eventually. And those guys never got credit. So I think, just in the interest of accuracy, I want to, and I don't know the name of the company, but those guys were there for sure, and they helped definitely recover bodies. Yeah, it was a lot of work, emotionally, physically, because you're pulling. I don't want to say, I hate to say dead weight. I mean, you're pulling, deceased people out of the water. And you're doing it all day, and then you're diving, and that's a physiological issue in and of itself. And then there's the mental and emotional, because there was a child, an 8-year-old girl, who floated up. I didn't grab her. One of the NCOs grabbed her, and man, I felt like I dodged a bullet. Man, I was like, I don't know if I could have done that, but he did. He just dove in instinctively and got her. But man, you have physical needs. You got to drink water, and you got to eat. And it was later in the afternoon, and the media started showing up. And I just had a few minutes to kind of take a break, and there was only so many places to go. And I sat down on the barge next to the bodies. Again, it wasn't intentional, but I was sitting there, and I started eating an MRE, a meal ready to eat, and drinking water. And like I said, the media started showing up. And I saw this guy kind of moving through the woods, like that's kind of weird. And then I see him, he's got like a telephoto lens, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, why is he looking at me? And I look, and I can already see how this is going to be perceived. I'm eating food next to dead bodies. And I just knew how that was going to be perceived by the public, by, all the, what's the word? The man there's the man in the arena, and then there's everybody else or whatever. So, I told my commander, and like I said, he had a good relationship with the FBI SWAT team. So he told them, like, hey man, this is what Kirk saw. And then by this time, the HRT showed up, which, this is a big deal to have these guys here. And they told them, well, I don't want to get anybody in trouble, but these are some, burly dudes that are allowed to carry machine guns around in the United States, man. And they went over there and they had a quick discussion, and I saw a very sad look on the face of the reporter, and he may or may not have given the camera up. I don't remember, but luckily for me in the Force Reconnaissance community, that picture never saw the light of day. But we did start having classes on media relations and things of that nature, and so I did learn a lot. I don't think I did anything wrong, but at the end of the day, man, perception's reality, and you got to figure you're always being looked at, and you're always being judged, and you're always being evaluated.
I think that's an excellent comment on that in itself of the image. I mean, all it takes is one photograph to be taken out of context, and no matter what the true story is, I mean, the image is completely ruined.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Now, how long did you stay in Force Recon, of course, after this period?
Yeah, I was in for a total of 4 years. I got out, and then I went to I came back into the reserves for 3 years in what they call the inactive reserve, and I never saw a war on the horizon, essentially. So I started pursuing law enforcement as a
You know,
career.
through that, I guess, search of jobs in itself, I mean, 9/11 happens at some point along in this timeline. Now, that's going to impact you heavily, if I'm not mistaken. Now, do you remember 9/11 and where you were that day?
Absolutely, I was a nightclub manager, and I'd worked my way up from being a bouncer to the head of security to, hey, this guy's not an idiot and he doesn't do drugs. Maybe he can run the nightclub type of thing. Yeah. So I think it was a Wednesday or a Thursday, but man, I'm sleeping in because I'm used to being up all night. And one of the bouncers called my roommates, like, "Hey, man, go get Kirk, go wake him up." And they're like, "Nah, man, we're just gonna let sleeping dogs lie. No, man, you need to wake him up, man. You need to turn on the TV." And like everybody else in America, man, I sat there, and it was certainly it was a fascinating and interesting thing to behold. However, it was not surprising for myself and some of my friends. I was in college. All my true friends were veterans. And we all kind of had the same story of. We just all kind of had the same story, and we were just trying to look for the next step. Man, the military wasn't really what we thought it was going to be, or whatever, or we didn't have the opportunity we thought we should have, and so we were going to college and just trying to get through college and not get arrested for. I mean, the drill, man. There's the 18-year-old kid that thinks he knows everything, and then it's like there's you, and you're like, "Look, kid, you've never been out of your mom's basement. Please shut up. Just go with it," or whatever. But yeah, so I wasn't 100% surprised. I was, uh, and you can look back on any number of failures that, like I said, my friends and I had pointed out these things many times, but we weren't in positions of authority. You know what I mean? You can only, in fact, I was in a public speaking class the year before, and I touched on a lot of these things in public speaking, and my professor didn't like it because he was left of center, and he didn't like having a veteran in his class, to be honest. And he kind of said that in not so many ways, and I think he told me later he had worked at the Pentagon at some point, and I'm like, well, hey, man, I'm not the Pentagon, I'm not the source of your frustrations, man. I'm just some guy trying to get a degree. But in any case, yeah, it definitely affected everyone. It's just that I'm not gonna say we saw it coming, but we knew something like that could happen. And then you go back in history, and getting rid of the federal air marshals and the reduction in forces, and more emphasis, like you see today, more emphasis on non-combat training, mandatory training versus hey, look, man, your job is to go locate, close with, and destroy the enemy with fire, maneuver, or close contact. Your job is not necessarily to find out how to get along with 100 different people who have 100 different ideologies and such. There's other people that do that, but that's not what you do. You know what I mean? So, so like I said, it wasn't a total surprise. I mean, obviously you're surprised that someone could fly a building an airplane into a building, but then again, it's like, yeah, I can see it happening, and I can see why.
Well, it's like, I remember that day vividly. I was in second grade, and that when it initially happened, I remember eventually our teacher, of course, not perhaps knowing everything, put on the television, and we're sitting there, and I'd seen these two buildings before. I knew the New York skyline from watching like the Today Show, because quite
Oh
common.
yeah,
And
sure.
we watched it live on TV as the second plane, United 175, hit the South Tower, and that's when I guess everyone else who turned on the TV realized that this is not an accident. And so I can remember the vast patriotic feeling for the months after that, the drive for enlistment, because we knew, even as a kid, I knew that people were going to go to war. Now, for you, was that the spark that led you to try to find your way back into the military?
Absolutely, it absolutely was. I was yeah, I was very disappointed. I'd turned my back on the military. Long story short, I'd applied to a program a few years earlier and did not get accepted, and it was a military program. And it's a long story, but I did not get accepted, and I was like, okay, I'm done with all this. I've had enough. And then, of course, I never got a law enforcement job. I think I would have been happy in law enforcement. I could never get a job in law enforcement, So I was like, man, what is it with me? Is it me? I mean, is it at some point, is it, okay, is the entire system wrong, or is it me? And if it is me, what am I doing wrong? You know what I mean? Um, I didn't really know, yeah, that was definitely the spark. I went immediately to the Marine recruiter, and God bless him, man. What a I wish I knew his name. The gunnery sergeant who ran the Mobile, Alabama Marine Corps recruiting depot in September 11th, 2001. If I can ever find you, I'll shake your hand. You probably saved my life, or at least saved me some aggravation. But I went in there and I was just like, hey, Gunny, I'm a former recon Marine. I want to get back in, man. And he's like, man, what are you doing now? I said, well, I'm managing this club. He's like, yeah, man, look, dude, this thing's going to be over in 6 months. He's like, man, you're going to waste your life. You're going to waste your time. You're going to go back, you're going to go to the fleet, man. And you're just going to, he was thinking Desert Storm, because that's how everybody thought during Desert Storm, and very few people were involved, et cetera. So he talked me out of it, man. And I was like, well, thanks. And then I met a Marine officer recruiter who came into the bar, and we get to talking. And he was like, hey, man, you ever think about being a pilot? And I said, well, I don't have the eyesight. And he was like, well, we got waivers, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, so you're telling me you'll take me, I'm a senior in college. I said, you'll take me. I don't have my degree yet. I don't have 20/20 vision. I can go to flight school. He's like, oh, yeah, man. Oh, dude. He goes, we need pilots and we need lawyers. And I said, well, I don't want to be a lawyer. No offense. I got buddies who are lawyers. But I said, absolutely, man. And then long story short, I wound up moving up to Atlanta for a job opportunity. And I lost touch with the guy, and kind of lost, I hate to say it, I kind of lost interest, I don't want to say I lost interest in it. I just, I wasn't against being a pilot, but I had not done what I wanted to do on the ground, and that was really what I wanted to do, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So, but I will say the Marine Corps did talk to me about the opportunity about being a Marine aviator, and when push came to shove, I was like, yes, I am very interested, but man, there's just these other things I've got to get out of my system first. And so that was the direction I went.
So, when with that direction, I mean, where does that lead you? How do you end up in the Middle East with what you can say?
Yeah, sure, man. Yeah, absolutely. So, man, you throw stuff against the wall and you see what sticks. Um, I applied. I had narrowed it down to I had narrowed it down to three choices. One was the Atlanta Police Department, where I could be. I like dogs, so I figured I could be a canine guy, and then I could be a SWAT guy, and then they had helicopters. I could be on their air unit. So I figured that'd be a pretty cool career. Maybe be a SWAT guy, be a canine guy, and be a helicopter pilot. That sounds pretty cool. So I applied on the same day. I applied to Atlanta Police Department, and then I applied to the Air National Guard in Georgia. They had a JTAC unit, a TACP unit. JTAC is Joint Terminal Attack Controller, and TACP being a Tactical Air Control Party. These guys go out, they're embedded with special operations teams, and they call in airstrikes and stuff. So that was like, man, that would be super cool. So I applied to them, and then my buddy Rusty Pugh, former SF guy, gave me a phone number. Some dude named Eric up in North Carolina was like, "Hey man, call this guy and see what he says." And that was Blackwater. So I applied to all three of these people on the same day, and I was just like, "Hey man, whoever comes back first, that's who I'm going with." And boy, it must have been within, I don't know, 48 hours or less, man. These Blackwater guys were like, "Hey, man, you're a Force Recon guy. You're this, you're that." I'm like, "Yeah, man, it's been a while, but yeah, I do have that." "Okay, man. Hey, can you make our next training date?" I'm like, "Okay, when is it?" You think you could get on a plane on Sunday and be here for Monday?" I'm like, "Absolutely, man." So they sent me a ticket, man. I'm on the next thing smoking, and I'm like, "Hey, man, had a good time, guys, but I'm out." The Air Guard did call me, I will say that. And the lady, she seemed interested, but I said, "Hey, look, I don't want to burn bridges here, but man, Blackwater's offering me XYZ, and I'm still kind of in the courting phase with you, and it's a government organization, and nothing happens fast, and until you hire me, I'm out here, breaking up fights for $10 an hour at 32 years old. So I really don't want to keep this going, So I went to Blackwater, man, and
Well, and even through that, I mean, there's a lot of comments that have made about Blackwater. We're not going to dive into that because with your book, I know a key focus is your personal recollection, not the bullshit, but what you yourself saw from a ground's eye point of view, and that's what I want to focus on. Now,
sure.
I know with Blackwater that they were, if I'm not mistaken, all over parts of the Middle East during this time period. I mean, in the book, you mentioned your experiences, and I know one of those being Ramadi. Now, however, did you have time on the ground before Ramadi with Blackwater?
I did, and let me just say that Blackwater didn't do anything that anyone else didn't do.
Yep.
Also, the customer is always right. Okay, who's the customer? The customer is the U.S. State Department. Not always. There's other programs, and we'll talk about the special programs, I think, is what you're alluding to. But the customer is always right. Okay, and they have the checkbook. So if you want to keep the doors open and the lights on, you got to do what they say. Now remember, there was a lot of special operations people working for Blackwater, so a phenomenal pool of talent. A smart man would simply go to these people and say, "What do you suggest?" But that's not what the government does. And man, the older I get, the more experience I get with government, I realize these are people that can't make it in the real world sometimes. So these State Department people were like, essentially, "Hey, we want you to use this SOP that we've been using in Washington, D.C., and apply it to Baghdad and Ramadi and all these other places." And we were all like, "Well, that's not, you don't want to roll in a motorcade." And they're like, "Oh yes, we do. We need to show the prestige of the U.S. State Department." Well, that's why you get into gunfights. That's why you get people angry at you. That's why you get. That's how you turn the population against you when you're running 4 and 5 black Suburbans through traffic and knocking people out of the way. The State Department told us to do that. Okay, they said we had to do that because that was their SOP. That was not what we would have done. So let me just say, for Blackwater and all the other companies, we're not. This was not like a bunch of cowboys like, "Oh, we're just going to be assholes." The State Department mandated that that's the SOP we used, but that was not what we wanted to do. If that if that kind of clears it up.
Oh, absolutely it does. And that's one of the reasons I like asking you some of these questions is because, you're going to give a straight, hard-lined answer in itself. You don't beat around the bush. And that's one of the things I respect about you there, Kirk. Now, with your first
That's always been good to my career, but yeah, man, you get what you see what you get.
Well, in this line of work, I mean, I think it's necessary. Neither of us have time for bullshit realistically, and what we're getting down to is your personal story. Now, through this, once Blackwater finally, of course, sends you overseas, was that to Afghanistan or to Iraq initially?
I went to Iraq. I was they had some Blackwater was a relatively big company, and when you become a big company, you start to kind of diversify. So they had like Blackwater training, Blackwater, they had all this stuff. Well, the Blackwater training came up with a pretty good idea from a business standpoint. Is they would take guys who've been out for a while, like myself, and put you through training, but you sign a contract, and they guarantee you 2 years of work, and you guarantee that you won't quit and go to some other company for higher pay. And that's what I did. And so in a training class, you might have some spec op guys. We had a couple of Rangers in our class, myself. And then you might have guys with no real military experience. We had a couple of police officers and stuff like that. And, man, the not every job was like, sneaking and peeking and all that. Sometimes it was just straight up security type stuff in a high threat environment. And a lot of the law enforcement guys were really digging that, like, hey man, here's a job I qualify for, and it's more than the department I work for, and I can make money for a couple of years and come back to my department. And because cops don't get paid shit, so that was their opportunity to get ahead. But the first job I had was what's called the Mambas, and I didn't do it very long. They just had to kind of get us out the door and get us jobs. So I was on the Mambas. We had these like four or five of these South African armored vehicles, which were made back in like 1982 for the Bush Wars, for the counterinsurgencies down there, and they had a V hull because of all the landmines. Well, when people see the MRAP vehicles in the military, they're like, oh, that's brand new technology. No, it's not. It came from South Africa, and it was called the Mamba. And that's what I did for a couple of weeks when I first got there. And we would essentially run up and down Route Irish, taking people back and forth to the airport, because there was, at that time in 2004, there was practically zero helicopter support, and the insurgency was just starting. So we had armored vehicles. You'd load up in the vehicle, and I think I was on a machine gun or something, and you're just covering an area with a machine gun as you drive down this road, hoping not to get ID'd or hit with an RPG. And man, you do it a couple of times and don't get in contact with the enemy, man. Honestly, you kind of start, at least for me, I don't want to put words in other people's mouths, but you get a little arrogant. Honestly, man, you're like, oh, I got this, man. This war isn't so bad. Well, 2004, the insurgency hadn't really started. So I was kind of looking for something else. There was an SAS guy down in a place called Al Hilla, a Australian special air. That's their version of Delta Force. And he was running a couple of PS personal security details down there. And I think he called up to Baghdad like, hey man, you got any hitters, you got any shooters, man, that want to come down here and mix it up, because they were starting to get more and more contact, and the guys were like, hey man, you got any spec ops guys or infantry guys, you can send down here. And so my name came up, and I was on, I think they drove up there and picked me up. Like I said, we didn't have helicopter support at that time. They came and picked me up, packed up all my stuff. I went down there, and I started working with we had a lot of retired Latin American special ops guys, and I was basically like their commander until he could put me on a team. And he had to double his team, so he had one team, and then he had two so he had to fill all these spots. So he started getting people. Well, he wound up filling up those two teams, and I didn't have a call sign, so it was just like, hey Kirk, I don't have a spot for you here, but you're a good dude, and they need a guy over in Karbala. So I wound up going over to Karbala as I started out as a machine gunner on what they call the diamond. The diamond is essentially four people who walk around a dignitary. In this case, he was the representative of the ambassador, so he was a State Department guy, and I can't remember his exact position. But basically, I was one of his bodyguards, and I was at the back with the machine gun. And if we got attacked, I would move up with the machine gun and just start laying suppressive fire, and the other three guys would grab him and either get him to cover or ideally get him to a vehicle. So it was kind of the unspoken rule that I don't want to say they were going to leave me behind. That's not really how it worked. Um, but I was not as important as the principal, right? The idea was to get him out. And since I had the machine gun, hey, this is your job. Either you don't want it or you do, you know. So I was like, yeah, man, I can handle that. So in the event of contact, I would move up to the contact and suppress. Yeah, that's it. That's
That's
exactly
it.
right.
That came up perfect.
Yeah,
Just making
that was
sure.
it.
I'll put that back up there.
Yep, that's exactly right. So I'll move up to contact and just start suppressing the enemy with the machine gun. Um, and hopefully I would know where they were, or they would call to me or something like that. Once they got, the idea was you gotta protect the principal, man, and I would theoretically have enough ammo on me to hold off a small army. They would get to me eventually, you know, is the plan. But it's just kind of, it's big boy rules, man. It's just like, hey, man, we're not paying you, you know, $700 and $800 a day to, you know, work out twice a day, man. It's a dangerous fucking business, man. And a lot of guys much better than me were killed doing that, unfortunately, man. And I just got lucky, to be quite honest with you. I'm not good. I've just been lucky in my career. But that was my job. After about a month, I moved to the driver of the gun truck, that truck you see behind you. And I wound up being a good driver, which is considered very important in that line of work, controlling the vehicle, because that's your first line of defense is the vehicle. Actually, not the machine gun. The first line of defense is the vehicle.
Well, and getting to that too, I know that especially in the environment you're operating in, moving through villas or even urbanized cities like Ramadi in itself, at any given point, regardless if you're attached to working with special operations, I know you eventually work with some very well-known Navy SEALs in the community, or even with the dignitaries, there is danger that could literally be anywhere at any given point. I mean, it's what a few guys I've talked to refer to it as Indian country, is that it was the Wild Wild West.
You're exactly right, and those guys hit the nail on the head. Um, you know, for me as a driver, I took it seriously because a lot of attacks start on the road. When you hear about very dangerous places, I talked about Route Irish earlier. That was the most dangerous road on planet Earth, and it was like 3.2 miles, I think, from the airport to the green zone. And I remember when I first got there, I made a joke about, 3.2 miles, man. That's, I don't need to be in an armored car. I don't need a gun. And everyone looked at me like I was an imbecile. And I found out later how many people had died on that 3.2 mile stretch of road. And I was like, man, I got a lot to learn. But most attacks start out on the road. So if you're a driver, you have a lot of responsibility. If you do something out of whack, you could get everybody in the vehicle killed. You know, obviously they don't want to die, so their life is in your hands, and it takes a lot of self discipline for because these are all Type A personalities. These are very capable people, man. They're not, these are some tough dudes, man. They can fight it out for sure, but they have the self discipline not to open the armored car and shoot, because once you open that door, now it's no longer an armored car. A bullet can come in and bounce around. So these guys are depending on you, the driver, to get them through the ambush, or to get them through. You might have to run a checkpoint. And hey, man, you're the guy. If you do it wrong, you could disable the vehicle, and now you got 4 or 5 guys on the X. Possibly surrounded. So there was a lot of responsibility to being a driver. And like I said, I was a good driver, but then again, I was lucky in many instances. Um, I left Iraq after my first tour, and the vehicle I was driving on the way back from the well, it wasn't not after they dropped off me, but a few days later, they were coming back from an airport run, and the vehicle that I was driving got IED'd on a place called Route Jackson, and the driver, the guy I'd swapped out with, he had to get medevaced. My replacement, who was in the right gun, he was killed. He was from Atlanta. He was a friend of mine. He was killed. My former rear gunner, who was a retired Marine named Bruce Durr, he became the team leader. He was decapitated by the blast. So two guys were killed, and then the driver was urgent surgical medevac, and that was within a week of me leaving. And that was the vehicle that I had driven for several months. And there's a video of it, and I've watched the video probably 100 times. And I sit there and I put skateboard tape on the steering wheel because I wore gloves so I wouldn't slip on the wheel. And I saw, I mean, it was terrible, man. I went to Bruce's funeral because I was at home, and I had a mental break. That was my first mental breakdown, and like I said, a lot of people, I'm not throwing stones, man. You got to have a public image or whatever, but I think the bravado kind of needs to fucking kind of stop a little bit with some of these guys, man. I'll just tell you to your face, man. I had a mental fucking breakdown, man. I went to his funeral, man, and I just had a breakdown. I couldn't move. I was overcome with emotions. And I know people looked at me like I was crazy, man. There's this little girl, and I don't know who she was. I mean, it was a small town in Mississippi, man. And, his uniform, he was a retired Marine infantry instructor. So his uniform was on display, and I'm just sitting there running my hands on the uniform. I just seen him 2 weeks ago, and now I'm watching him being lowered to the ground. And this little girl comes up to me, and she just kind of tugs on my suit, and she was like, "Was that your friend?" And I just fucking lost it, man. I mean, goddamn. I was just overcome with emotions, man. But that was real combat, and that's what real combat is. And it's not all the other stuff you hear about or whatever. And man, I had wanted. It's hard to explain, but I wanted the experience. I didn't want that experience, but I did want the experience. So I really didn't have anybody to blame but me. But I do think it's common. People are kind of looking, I guess, to see what they're made of or whatever. I don't really have an answer for you. Young men have been doing it for thousands of years. But that was my first, kind of, hey, this is real, man. This isn't a fucking joke.
Well, and two, I mean, anyone who's ever served can tell anyone this. And I've never done it, but I've interviewed a lot of people who have made very similar comments that you do. It's one thing to get into country and to see flags draped over coffins coming back. Yes, it hits hard, that's Americans, but it's another thing to lose somebody in a situation where it could have been you. I know I've got a great friend of mine, Mike Harris, who was a forward observer in 2-5 in 67 and 68. And he mentions very similar statements, and it echoes. You go back 2,000 years to some Roman soldiers slogging it out, and they're going to mention the same thing in very similar ways. But, you bring up a great point of survivor's guilt, which we often don't associate sometimes with our military personnel of, yeah, they came home, but the guilt that they carry of friends who didn't. I mean, that weighs. And, it's even still present today, some 20 years later.
Oh, yeah. And I'm glad you said that. I couldn't have said it any better. My gut feeling is that's kind of the reason, for lack of a better word, or at least the beginning reason for a lot of the alcoholism, the drug use, the suicide. I think a lot of it is survivor's guilt, because at the end of the day, if you're being honest with yourself, you're no better than the person who got killed. It was pure luck, man. It was pure luck. And so your brain is trying to process why him and not me. And you may never get an answer. I don't know if I'll ever get an answer, honestly. And I think that's veteran wide. I don't think anyone ever really comes to a conclusion. Maybe they do, but I haven't heard it.
Well, and it's like I think of a book I've got on this bookshelf, which soon, hopefully, I'll be adding yours to that collection for my students to read. That's why I have them
Oh
in
yeah.
here. But it's a book by a P-51 fighter pilot in the Mediterranean theater, and the title of his book is called "Dumb but Lucky." And that's it. All the veterans I've talked to that have seen combat and lost friends or have been a part of that world have put it the exact same way: is that it could have been me, but it wasn't. There's no answer to it. There's no rhyme or reason. It's I went left, he went right, and that was it. And that's all that boils down to, and it makes no sense.
Yeah. It makes absolutely no sense. I have a very good friend. I don't think he'll mind if I use his name. Um, Andrew Dusenberry, great guy, man. I'd love for you to talk to him. But one day in Mosul, 2005, he's running to the bunker during a mortar attack, and he can see the bunker. And this army soldier just happens to kind of cut him off, just happenstance, and a mortar landed right in front of this guy at exactly that time, and it totally vaporized this guy. And so Deuce, his call sign is Deuce. He gets fragged with the mortar fragmentations and the body parts and everything. And he has enough momentum to keep going into the bunker. So he survives the mortar and the rocket attack, but he's covered with this man's body parts, and he's wounded. He had to go to he had to get medevac. He's got fragmentation all in and everything. But how do you explain that? I mean, it was just pure happenstance. No one did something wrong. No one did something right. It's just one of those things that happens. But I know he carries a lot of that with him today, like everyone else does.
Well, and I think through us talking about this and the emotional aspect, it's important. I know when I interviewed Mike Harris for the first time, and I know he won't mind this. We did, I think, 10 interviews, and he said the greatest satisfaction for him was to one, let some of those emotions go, but also know that other people are hearing the stories. Whether it's people he's named that were killed or unnamed, he's like, at least somebody knows what happened to these people. They're not just lost to time. They're not just a name on a wall per se in itself where it just says killed in action. It's, they had a life and this is how it ended. And he said that's important, that people need to know what happened to them, but also the scars that we bury emotionally. That, no one can see the internal scars of a veteran. Only the veteran themselves knows that until you start to talk about it.
Yeah, and what you're doing. Don't undersell what you're doing, because you're telling the stories. You're getting the stories out there. I don't know too many people that would have been able to put all this together. So what you're doing is, and I'm not trying to throw stones at people, but what you're doing is better than the VA. What you're doing is better than the politicians. It's better than the counselors. It's definitely better than the chain of command. Um, so you have the most important piece and all that. The most effective piece is what you're doing. So man, on behalf of everybody, let me just thank you for what you're doing, getting the stories
Man,
out there.
you don't got to thank me. I'm just a guy who wants to talk to veterans who've been there because I mean, I believe that there's a story that has to be heard. We've got a chance to learn from the past and to understand the post-traumatic stress associated with veterans, but also the good things about your service, the good memories that you have. But we need to learn from it in this wonderful age of technology to, regardless of what current servers or anyone, but to let people understand, hey, this is what it's like for people who have been there. This is how we can perhaps help you in the future with understanding the emotional aspect and give you better treatment when you come back. And if it helps in a small way, then, I've done my part because I didn't serve. And this is my way of saying thank you to all of you guys out there and those who watch this. Now, and segueing back into this, Kirk, in itself, you mentioned that you wanted to experience combat to test yourself, right? Now, for your first combat experience, when you do have bullets flying, from your perspective, what is that like? Boots on the ground, rounds are impacting.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it was terrifying, man. It was May 10th, 2005, Ramadi. Um, I had just shown up about a week or two after I showed up was my first gunfight. I was a driver there, and again, man, I got everything I asked for. I mean, you just got to watch what you ask for. I wanted to kind of get back into the fight, you know. I wasn't over Bruce's and Tracker's death or anything like that. You know, I was just like, man, I got to get back over there, man. They need me, type of thing. And you know, we had a helicopter get shot down. We lost like 8 people, so we finally started getting helicopters. But they had, you know, they're able to shoot down helicopters. You know, I mean, so there's that. Um, then we lost the guy on his last day. His name was, or his call sign was Sparky. They were driving guys up to Ramadi, and the Ramadi team, the guys that were there, were like, "No, don't do that, man. That's horrible idea." Well, they drove the Mambas up there, and sure enough, man, they get hit in a complex ambush. And Sparky, he's on his last day in the country. He was not supposed to go on this move. He had his bags packed to go home that day. And he said, look, I think you guys need more people. Everyone's talking about Ramadi. It was just starting to get visibility in 05, early 05. And man, they got hit with a complex attack, an ID. Um, I believe it was fragmentation that went through the vehicle and killed him, and he bled to death right there on his last day in country, and he wasn't even supposed to be there, but he did it because he felt like, um, hey man, it's going to be Ramadi's a tough place. You're going to need every gun you can get, and that's just the type of people I was fortunate enough to work with for so many years of my life, and you know, good or bad, I'll never be around those type of people again, and that's difficult because you know, these were the gods of Mount Olympus, man, and you'll never replicate that. But yeah, my first gunfight was May 10th, 2005. Again, I was a driver, and if you're a good driver in this business, that's kind of what you do. It's important, and I selfishly wanted to be on the. I wanted to be a shooter. You know, I wanted to be on the what's called the CAT team, the counter assault team. I wanted to be in the gun truck. Um, and they're like, "No, man, we got that covered. You're a driver. And by the way, we hear you're a really good driver. So the most important thing you can do is drive the limo, which is the an armored sedan that carries the what's called the agent in charge, or the acting agent in charge, and the boss, who is a representative of the ambassador. Well, you know, man, I'm a type A personality and an alpha male, and I'm a recon marine and all this shit. I don't want to fucking drive a fucking limo, right? But it's a team. It's a, you know, you're part of a team, man. You know what I mean? You gotta do what's good for the team. But I was kind of an asshole. Like, I don't want to be the fucking limo driver. And they're like, well, goddamn, you know, wish in one hand and you know, crap in the other, and see which one gets full. So we had gone to the Governor's Center a few times, and the interpreter, who was a local national, was always balking about. I mean, it was, man, it was absolutely the most dangerous place in the world. Ramadi, from 2005 to about 2007, 8, was absolutely hands down the most dangerous place you could be in the world. And for whatever reason, I just kept going back and back and back to Ramadi. I don't have an answer for you, but anyway, I knew something was coming. You know, there was this big important meeting that everyone's going to be at, and we had to go to the Governor's Center. It sounded like an ambush, man. It sounded like an ambush, and I was like, "Well, what are you going to do, man? You know, it's you said you wanted to be here." And the interpreter, he got out of the car and he's like, "I'm not going." And he walked in there, man, and he chugged a big thing of like Maalox. I mean, his stomach was giving him fits, you know, and all this. So he knew something was going down, and if the interpreter doesn't go, you know, that's a warning sign. And this is the first time I'd ever seen this, but that's an attack indicator. And I carried that with me. That was lesson number one, and I learned a million lessons in Ramadi, but that was one. If the interpreter is like, "Nope, I'm not going," he knows something. We drove downtown. I was always worried about getting blown off this bridge. Because it was a State Department gig, they played the whole motorcade thing. So they blocked off traffic. Well, traffic was backed up for like a mile. And it's like, okay, we're telling the whole world that someone important is coming out of this gate, right? And then we got to cross over this bridge. So I had always assumed that I was going to get blown up on the bridge and blown into the Euphrates River and drown. That's how I figured I was going to go. Luckily, it never happened, but that's how I thought it was going to go. Anyway, we get to the Governor's Center. It was supposed to be like a 30-minute meeting, and you know how that goes. Grand plans of mice and men. After about an hour or so, we found out we are going to be there in the long term, waiting for the governor, right? Well, again, I didn't know this. He got kidnapped about a week later. He was always getting threats and all this type of stuff. Like I said, it was a crazy place, man. That place was crazy. But so anyway, the team leader was like, okay, team leader's doing what he should be doing. I need to start rotating guys through these positions because it's hot, man. It's 100-something degrees out there, and I'm just sitting there in the limo with the air conditioner with my Diet Pepsi or whatever. So they're like, "Hey, Tadpole needs you in the North Tower." Roger that. I grabbed my rifle. I went up there and I swapped out with a guy named Dallas, who was he was a SEAL team guy, but he was an 18 Delta Army Special Forces medic. So he had been to the 18 Delta course. He was our 18 Delta. And so I swapped out with him. And I walk up in the tower with a guy that I was buddies with named Tommy Jakner. His call sign was Bama. Tommy was ex-Ranger Battalion guy who went to the University of Alabama, graduated, opened up a restaurant, I think. And then after September 11th, he was like, hey, I want to go back in the military. He joined the 20th Special Forces Group, and he was waiting on his date to go to the selection and assessment for Special Forces. He's going to be a Green Beret. In the meantime, he turned over his restaurant to somebody else, and he was working for Blackwater, and that's the type of guy you met in this business. Well, I asked him, I said, man, where do you want me? He goes, man, why don't you look east and I'll look north? And right there, man, he saved my life because, Juba was there in Ramadi. Juba was working that area, and he had come down presumably for this big meeting, knowing there was going to be some high value targets. There was a car parked in front of us that we kept trying to get moved, and everyone kept saying that it was safe and they had searched it. Well, his spotter was in there with a camera. We found out later because the video came out online. But I was looking to the east, and I saw so many things, like a car pulls up randomly and a bunch of dudes get out and rush. They don't walk. They're not walking to a market. They don't have this innocent type movement like they're just out and about. No, they're moving as a fire team. And I saw that in a couple of places, and I called it in. So everyone's on alert. Everyone's kind of knowing something's going to happen. But you got to remember, this is over the course of about 4 or 5 hours, and there's no real definitive, hey, boom or whatever. Now there were a couple of IDs here and there. There was a couple of shots here and there. And you didn't know if it was snipers or if it was just somebody taking a shot at you or whatever. It's kind of hard to say. And like I said, man, nothing would happen for like 45 minutes, and then something would happen, and then nothing would happen for. So it's real. Again, I learned a great deal. What's the old saying? Combat is intense boredom perpetuated by moments of sheer terror, or something like that.
Yep.
That's a true statement, man. But so anyway, Juba had seen us in the tower, and we were just too much of a tempting target for him. And like I said, there's a video that went out there, and I think some of the Naval Criminal Investigative Services guys that got a hold of the video, there's like a short video, and then there's a longer video. And I think in the longer video, you could hear a conversation between the spotter and Juba, or maybe some third person in Juba, and they were trying to figure out who to shoot at. And it was me and Tommy they were talking about. And because of the sun angle and because he had shaved his head and I think he had some Italian in him, so he was darker skinned and had some of those features. I think they misinterpreted him as being a black guy. And so in the video, they say, should I kill the white guy or the black guy? And he said, kill the black guy. He's closer. But they were talking about Tommy. And I may not have that exact verbiage. I didn't see that video. That information was relayed to our team by the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, who kind of conducted a lot of the investigation, the post-contact investigation. But I think that was pretty accurate. So anyway, I'm looking to the east. Tommy's looked to the north, and I hear a crack. And I see this puff of smoke, which is the bullet traveling towards Tommy. It hit him it went through his wrist because he had binoculars. It went through his wrist and then in his neck, and he falls over, right next to me. And I'm just looking at him like, what the hell just happened? And literally, man, I'm just confused by the whole situation. Paul Fondren, who had been there before, he was one of the original Ramadi guys. He had been there with Triple Canopy, former paratrooper, former police officer. I believe he's a rocket scientist in Huntsville now. I was supposed to get together with him last couple of weeks ago, but anyway, he works on some program in Huntsville. I don't know, he's got like 2 master's degrees or something. Anyway, Paul's coming up in the tower, and he saw it. And evidently they had lost people in this tower before, or they had lost people to snipers. I mean, it's just Ramadi was just a dangerous place. So he knew instinctively what happened, and he knew what was about to come next. What was going to come next was the follow-up shot, because I'm just standing there like an idiot, And he's like, "Sniper, get down!" And I dove kind of to the side of Tommy, but behind this like wall of concrete. Wall, and then a round went over me, and which I assume is the follow-up shot from Juba. But obviously, Paul Fondren saved my life at that exact moment, and Tommy Jakner had saved my life earlier by telling me to look to the east instead of the north. So, man, again, I just got lucky. But the whole place erupted into a firefight. Paul got on the radio and said Bama had been hit and that he was dead. And then, man, everybody just started shooting out into the city. The final protective fire they kind of teach you at infantry school. And I think there was about 30 Marines there. And again, I don't want to say this was not a common occurrence, but it wasn't unprecedented. I mean, Ramadi was just fucking nuts, man. So they fired into likely areas where he could have been, everybody just started shooting. Man, it was just, it was like, I'll send you a video. It's on my YouTube channel. If you go to KG Spradley author on YouTube, one of the videos is on there, man. You can barely hear anybody talking. There's just so much machine gun fire and everything. So everybody was firing. Some Marines came up in the tower and assessed him. And, they're just like, man, hey, I'm sorry, man. We can't help him. He's gone, and I couldn't hear them, but I could read their lips because the gunfire was just so intense. But man, they just braved the gunfire and ran up there trying to help and, apologized to me because they couldn't help. And I don't know, man, it was just this incredible act of bravery from these 3 young Marines, or 2 Marines and a corpsman, whatever it was. And holy shit, man, that's just kind of the things you see sometimes, is that kind of bravery that never gets acknowledged, and it pisses me off, man, because I wouldn't have done that. I mean, maybe I would have, I don't, but probably not, man. I wouldn't have ran up in this damn exposed tower with machine gun, sniper fire everywhere. But they did. They ran up there, man, because they were doing what Marines do. And then they ran back outside and got in the gunfight. Eventually, the team leader, he felt like we were going to be overrun because it was such a high profile event. We were definitely outnumbered. There was 30 something Marines, about 12 of us, and it's not a greatly defensible position downtown. So his decision, and I certainly don't disagree with it. I know where he's coming from. You know, he's got, you know, he has to be concerned about getting this State Department guy out of there, because if he gets captured or killed, I mean, you saw Benghazi, you know, an ambassador gets killed and drugged through the streets. I mean, that's obviously it's bad on a personal and a professional level, but you're no longer a person, you're representing the United States. And so an enemy has desecrated the United States, and you just have to think like that at that level. And so that's what the team leader did. He's like, hey, we're just going to get the hell out of here. Drivers, get back to your vehicles. I ran back and got in the limo. And, you know, I was just like, man, you know, here we go, man. Hopefully we can get out of here. And obviously I was thinking I had the only sedan, so I knew I was going to be a bullet magnet. But hey, man, you're that's the job. You know? But yeah, so I was in the car for a few minutes and didn't hear anything, any word, you know. And again, everybody's busy, and the last thing you want to do is get on the radio. The first thing you want to do is get on the radio. Don't do that, man. You're just causing confusion. The best thing you can do, whether you're in the infantry or special operations or aviation, stay off the radio, man. You're only adding to the confusion. Stay off the radio. And that's what I did. I certainly had a lot of questions, but I was like, look, they'll get back to me. I decided to get in the gunfight, you know, because, hey, man, maybe we won't get overrun if I get my ass out of here and start killing bad guys. So I crawled through the vehicle and opened it up. And I'm on the non-contact side. So the contact is from my left. I'm on the right side of the vehicle, and I'm down behind the door. And when you open up a car door, there's this little gap, and we call it the V, so I'm shooting from the V. And I'm looking for, because everybody's just shooting, you know, like at likely positions of enemy. But I see a guy, he's like probably on the second or the third floor of a building across the street. So he's probably 100 meters, I guess, away, maybe 125 meters away. And what you learn about human behavior, certainly during a gunfight or an attack, is that if someone is frozen, they're probably not the bad guy. If they're running away, they're probably not the bad guy. The person who is moving towards you or moving kind of zigzagging or something of that, the level of training and discipline and everything that goes into a person being able to do that, they're the bad guy. Whether they have a rifle, whether they have a uniform, man, just all that shit goes out the window. The state of mind of a human being that can operate in that environment, that's how you know who the bad guys are. They're moving towards you. And I see him moving, man. And I put a round into him, and you know, man, nothing. I mean, he just kept coming, man. You know, and like I said, that was the first time I've ever shot another human being. You know, and in the movies, it's one shot, one kill. Nah, man, it didn't phase the guy, man. He just kept coming, which was a learning point for me. Hey, man, you gotta you shoot a target till it goes down is what you do. The one shot thing is just a myth. But my magazines had fallen out, and I told this story. I forgot. I think it was on another podcast. I had a double magazine thing in the M4, and that's a terrible setup. And we had a couple of team guys and a dev group guy. They're like, man, don't use that. We tried that back in the 80s. It's no good. Well, it looked like a good idea, so I ignored them. Well, it's too heavy, and it fell. So my next pull of the trigger is like click, and I'm like, oh my god, you know. And I was like, man, I hope nobody saw that. You know, I'm worried about, you know, being embarrassed, you know, instead of being killed. So I grabbed another magazine, put it in there, and he's there. Like I said, I shot him probably about 3 or 4 more times. He goes down, and my initial response obviously was like, you know, holy shit, I just killed a guy. And then you start looking for other guys, you know, and then like your brain starts kind of coming back or whatever. And like I said, I saw Hoser. He was a Force Recon scout sniper. He's on my left, and he's shooting at the guy. And then I see Donkey on the right. He was he was our K9 guy, but he had been in I want to say like a SWAT team in law enforcement. So he's a very good shot, right? Well, he's shooting at him. So then after you've decided you just killed the enemy, you're like, okay, did I shoot him or did those guys shoot him? Or did none of us shoot it? Because everybody's on the roof with machine guns and stuff. So it gets a little, you don't know, man. There's no way to know. But I did sight in on the guy, pulled the trigger, and then he went down. And so at least in my mind, I was able to say, okay, well, I'm able to do my job under stress. That's a bonus, because this is going to come up again. This is going to happen again. My first reaction, not not quite an A. You know what I mean? There's nothing to be proud of, but then it's going to happen again, and now you know what to expect. And so the second time, and the third time, and the fourth time it happens, your performance is significantly better. If you live through your first contact, certainly, but your performance is much better because you've made those mistakes, or you know what a good idea is and what's not.
Now, and two, with this being, an urban environment in itself, I mean, I can only imagine the fact that your different zones and sectors of fire, I mean, the enemy could be approaching from a multitude of alleys. You've got multitude of two-story buildings, and then you've got the fact that regardless of what's happening to your left, you can't focus there. You've got your 45-degree window, and that's where you focus to make sure there's not a gap in the defense or the perimeter.
You're exactly right. The most dangerous and most intensive combat throughout history has always been urban environments. Whether it's the Battle of Fallujah, the Battle of Ramadi, the fight for Mosul, going after ISIS. If you go back to World War II, Stalingrad, some of the other cities and I can't remember all the cities they pushed into. If you look at Vietnam, the Battle of Way City, I mean, these are, and you can go all the way back to the time of the Romans and the Greeks. They had to create siege weapons because everyone eventually buttons up inside a city. So that's where siege weapons was created, and that's where biological attacks was actually created. They started catapulting dead bodies who were killed by the plague, and that was the first biological attack during warfare. Is they're catapulting these dead bodies into the cities, the walled compounds. So urban warfare has always been the worst you can fight in.
Absolutely. One, two. I mean, with the urban environment, it's a point-to-point contact. I mean, at some point, depending on where that firefight's ranging, whether it's Way, whether it's Stalingrad, whether it's Garapan on Saipan or Fallujah or Ramadi, someone's going to have to go in and clean out that building, and you've got to do it from the top up, work your way, or you've got to figure out how do you get into that building. Do you go in through the door, which is probably a no-go? Do you go in through a hole that you make in the side? And at that point, and as you know, as an operator in itself, within your time in Force Recon, the statistical number of you getting wounded or hit increases significantly because it's point to point. We're looking, within 100 meters, if not closer.
Yeah, you're exactly right, and you can't, and that's the thing. There's only so many ways you can get into a building or a room or something like that, and I will relay a story, and it may not be 100% accurate, and so I apologize and I wasn't there, but it was in Ramadi. There was and this is just to illustrate the point of the difficulty of the urban environment and being predictable and having to come up with other solutions. There was a high value target that the Delta guys were going after, and this individual was pretty sure someone would come for him eventually. So what he did is he put a PKM, which is a machine gun, at the end of his hall, and put sandbags in front of it. And so it was right in front of his bedroom. So if anyone came into the house, he would just run out there and get on the machine gun. And the hallway led to his bedroom. So there's only one way to get to this guy's. I mean, theoretically, there's only one way to get to this guy's room to get him. And he was so high up the food chain, he knew someone would get him or come for him eventually. And eventually, the D boys found him and did a raid. And like I said, I wasn't there, and I don't want to say it in a disparaging way if anybody's listening or whatnot and has greater details, they can reach out. But the Delta guys came through and they're trying to clear rooms. Well, at some point, you're going to have a um, large number of operators in the hallway, a kill zone, and he took that opportunity with the PKM. And he killed, I think it was seven. He killed seven Delta guys in that one raid. And they had to replace that squadron because they had so many casualties. And then from then on, the AAR comments after that were, you can't go through the front door. You need to start coming up with enterprising ideas on how to make entry. So then that's when people started coming up with the idea of blowing holes in walls, blowing holes in roofs, just being absolutely, multiple entries at the same time so that you're not predictable. But it kind of all came from that one raid,
Well, and even then too, I know that taking the lessons from Fallujah that had been learned, months prior, that it was still evolving, even into Ramadi, that even with the experience that had been learned, a lot of that information perhaps hadn't been shared or people were still learning on the job. And, training's evolving. And even today, we train on close quarters combat, but at some point, with any kind of war that we will get involved to, it delves down into urban combat at some point, whether you get to some big city or even villages where you have to sweep and clear.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And if you could kind of clip your comment there and maybe make that somehow shareable or something, that kind of hits all the high points that people need to listen to. There's a turnover rate in the military. There's a lot of lessons learned that don't get uh, pushed down the line. Training is not bad, but experience is a hell of a lot better. And I've had this conversation with a lot of people. If you walk up to anybody in the Army or the Marines right now and ask them, um, you know, hey, what's the length of your haircut should be? Oh, 0 to 3 inches or whatever. Hey, how high up should your ribbons be above the top of the thing? Is it 1/8 or 1/4? Well, they know the answer to all that shit. But then when you start asking, like, hey man, do you have bullet drop with a 10-inch barrel with a 223? And at what point does it happen? Or should you use a 16-inch barrel? You start asking some of these things. How would you do a room entry? Would you totally bypass a room, or would you start asking? And and maybe that's too complex, but I think you understand what I'm saying. These
Absolutely.
lessons learned in combat do not get passed on unless it's mouth to mouth. And without getting too further down the road, I was selected on my last deployment. I was selected as the tactical operations officer to go to Erbil when I was flying dust off. My standardization pilot, who on the is a friend of mine certainly, but he wanted me to go because I was the only guy with combat experience, and he wanted me to bring that combat experience to the forefront because no one had it. Unfortunately, my commander, who was from another organization, unfortunately, um, he just shut me down. He didn't want to hear anything I had to say because he wanted everyone to look up to him. So, and then we could get into the conversation of the me first people and the mission first people. But luckily, none of us died, although we did have some close calls. A lot, the experience that I tried to bring to the table was verbally, like, "Hey, I saw this. Watch out for this." But because it wasn't in a book somewhere that someone could reference, man, he just thought I was going off the deep end, and that's the U.S. military, man. That they're filled with guys like that.
Absolutely. Well, I think that one of the wisest words of combat and I guess tactical experience that have ever been told to me was interviewing some of the men who fought in Way City with Delta 1-5 and those specifically under Hotel 2-5 under the command of now retired Lieutenant General Ron Christmas. And their battalion commander, Ernie Cheatham, when they entered Way City, the first step that they took, realizing it was urban environment, is Cheatham wanted every book on World War II Korea that mentioned urban fighting, but also they utilized those in itself that had grew up in cities. Okay, you know, let the city kids give you the layout of how cities work. Let the others around you that have different experience, regardless of rank, be the leaders, be the teachers. And for some guy who's never served, this could be a hot take. However, you know, at that point, rank goes out the window and it becomes a mission first type where you let those with the experience do the leading, let everyone learn because it's for the safety of the entire team or the entire squad or the platoon.
No, you're exactly right. And man, I'm every time we talk, I'm more and more impressed with your knowledge. Seriously, man. But no, you're exactly right. In generally speaking, in the special operations community, you look up to the person who has the experience, and it's not as rank conscious. And the first people to do that was the Marine Raiders in World War II, and their motto was gung ho, which some people misinterpret as motivated. Actually, is Chinese. It means work together. That's what gung ho means, because there was no. Everyone had to go through the same training. Whoever had a good idea, they could bring that idea forward, and their motto was gung ho, and that's kind of the first real modern special operations that America had, or you could at least argue that it was. But that was very much the plan of the day in special operations. When I went to aviation, I was always told that aviation people are smarter, and I didn't think that was exactly the case. Aviation is conventional military, and whether you paint your helicopter camouflage or black, or call it AFSOC and put tiger stripes on it, it's conventional. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be an asshole. I'm proud to be an aviator, but it's conventional people with conventional thinking. Perhaps because of the expense of the equipment, I don't know, but it's very rank conscious, and that was a problem I had going from special operations to aviation. Someone who had no fucking idea what they were doing was in charge just because they had been there longer.
Yeah, well, and I think that's going to be a good talking point for our part two tomorrow, which I'm gonna continue, or I guess it would be part three technically, because I'm sadly short on time. I got kids getting ready to come in here.
Yeah.
However, this is phenomenal today. Talking with you and the relationship we've built is an honor for me to call you a friend, and I cannot wait
Absolutely.
to have your book out there. So, as
Hell yeah.
always, my friend, thanks for your service. Welcome home, and we will continue part three of this tomorrow.
Thank you, Zach. Appreciate it, brother. Catch you tomorrow, man.
Thanks, brother.